computer. Hello, folks. This is Nathan Chu again. I'm here in the Philippines in Metro Manila, Quezon City, and I'm deeply honored to have two of my colleagues here who are based in different parts of the world. Uh, Eugene, uh, this is the first time I'm having him as a guest, and he's an ACT practitioner from Malaysia, and I think you're also a psychiatrist. Is that correct, Eugene?
Correct. That is correct.
Yes. All right. And thank you. And this is, I think we met once when you facilitated that talk that I did for couples, right?
Yes.
Applying it, uh, applying IBCT to couples, which is in line with the contextual behavioral science or ACT. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, Jacob is somebody you're probably familiar to my audience out there. We've done a few videos together, including uh, uh, a workshop about recovering from infidelity. Hi, Jacob. And Jacob is from Wisconsin, and it's in the morning there. And Eugene is not in Malaysia now. He's somewhere in Europe. So he's about in the afternoon there. So
Yeah.
Jacob is licensed a professional counselor from
Mhm.
Wisconsin. Is that correct, Jacob?
Yeah, definitely.
Uh,
Mhm.
and you specialize mostly with couples. Is that right?
I work mostly with couples right now, but I mean, I have historically worked with individuals, but right now my practice is mostly working with couples.
All right. Okay. So my first question to you guys is, by the way, the title of this video is about scaling contextual behavioral science from individuals to nations. So we have a lot to discuss tonight. I mean, today. All right. So let's start with your personal journeys into ACT and contextual behavioral science. I'll briefly discuss mine. All right. I came from a predominantly psychodynamic background where we were quite suspicious of behaviorism, especially B.F. Skinner. Okay. And our country, we're basically very into Catholicism, right? And ideas about having a soul. So that kind of runs counter. B.F. Skinner's ideas sort of runs counter to that in a way. So we were trained. I mean, not really trained, but the impression was it was Skinner was reductionistic and even controlling. Like we can be controlled like rats and pigeons, right? But as I got deeper into CBS or contextual behavioral science, I noticed something surprising. It actually made me more humane in how I see my clients. I shifted from asking what's wrong with this person, I always had that suspicion, to what context makes this behavior that I'm seeing or that I'm hearing about in the counseling room make sense. All right. So I'm curious about your journeys, right? How has your journey shifted how you see people, especially the people you that come and see you for counseling or for therapy? Who wants to start?
I suppose I could go first.
Uh-huh.
I don't have a particular linear line. Every time I get asked this question about how I got into CBS, because there's similar like Nathaniel. There's two things that kind of influenced. One was the religion part, the spiritual part. Another one was my professional training.
Mm-hmm.
Religion wise, I converted to Christianity. So when I was young, I was actually a staunch Buddhist, and I attended training and classic. And I distinctly remember that when you read the books, when you learn from the books, the theory part makes sense. But when you practice it, when you speak to the so-called experts, I remember I end up always falling asleep in class, and I couldn't quite grasp what was because back then the training or the classes that we attend was done by laypersons. The monks themselves don't really do the
Mm.
training. So I couldn't really grasp much of it, but much of those trainings shaped a lot of my belief and approaches even from back then. And of course, I converted to Christianity later, and we kind of stopped looking into that. But interestingly, the concepts of mindfulness that I pick up from those training kind of carry forward into my day-to-day practice and professional, because I've always found that um, the breathing exercise of the CBT component, they pretty much don't work on most clients, but yet when you start teaching them mindfulness, to a degree, they find it helpful. And then, of course, that evolved into professionally. And professionally, we are required as psychiatrists in our country, we're required to be somewhat basic understanding of CBT and psychodynamic. And also similar, like Nathaniel, is that I sort of gravitated to psychodynamic. So we were quite well versed with the formulations, and my center kind of trains me up with that. Only thing, one of the questions that came up more often than not, and my own mentor actually told me, you might not be so suitable to be a psychodynamician, was that one, I don't have the patience to sit through the full formulation. And I often find myself asking what's next after that, because formulations are great. You kind
Mm.
of talk to your clients about it, you build on that, but what's next? What's there from there? A lot of time clients they have the epiphany, they go to catharsis, they kind of know what's going on, but they kind of left half hanging there. They often, I find that they will ask more. So kind of merging the two thoughts coming together, eventually one of my colleagues pick up ACT, and
Mm.
she influenced the rest of a few of us, and we, a small group of us, going into it. And it was interesting because I pick up ACT very quickly, because a lot of the principles were already embedded in me because of the religion part. And yet with the psychodynamic part, because the way I was trained to ask and to look at things from different perspectives, that builds up the foundation of the RFT part in the CBS in me. They both, I was sort of like exposed to various similar techniques prior to going to ACT, going to RFT. And it's pretty much like, a fish in the water. Then I pick it up quite fast. I
Mm.
wouldn't consider myself a genius or anything. I always attribute it because of my past experience. Learning all this became easy, and we could relate to it very lightly. And yeah, and moving from that, we kind of I just grow from there and just keep learning and trying to get exposed to more and more of it. Right now, I am heavily more, slightly less into ACT, more into the RFT kind of approach into things, very
Mm.
transatlantic, a lot of things we look at is, why is this there? How I'm going to look at how the influence,
Mm.
and we formulate from there, and we move on from there. Then, um, yeah, I think that kind of sums up the journey that I'm into.
Did it kind of shift the way you see the person sitting in front of you from,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
One of the comments I remember my close friends, my close colleagues actually mentioned, and they still laugh about it. I went from someone who was very impatient and always result driven
Mm.
kind of person into suddenly I become, so what? I became more relaxed. I became
Mm.
more, uh, things were more flexible,
Mm.
and they still see it today, and they know that I think they often notice in times of very stressful, or a lot of high stress situations,
Mm.
I'm the one that would sit there, and I would just, so what if it's like that? What if like that? We kind of shift. I end up becoming very flexible instead of reacting emotionally.
Mm.
And of course, that also seeps into the way I do my own practice.
Mm.
Yes, we are clinically required to look DSM-5. We are heavily influenced by all those, but um, I often teach my own students that DSM-5 is your base layer. In order for you to be able to treat your patients better, to be understand better, you need to
Mm.
go a step further.
Mm.
I don't expect all of them to be ACT practitioners, but I've always pointed out to them that that true understanding always comes from some form of therapy. And then in my case,
Mm.
having the understanding of RFT, having the understanding of ACT,
Mm.
uh, changes a lot of things. Changes a lot of things. I no longer look at patients to say that I'm treating you for depression. I sometimes don't even mention the word depression. We will just go
Mm.
work on the things you're stuck with now, and medications do come in still, but we add on the way we talk about it. We look at the experience itself, and the decisions, the clinical decisions, are heavily shaped by what comes out from that conversation. It's no longer about what comes out from the symptoms, but what comes out from the conversation, and then the treatment will shift towards that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eugene. That was very informative. Yeah. That brings up a lot of questions. But right now, let me turn to Jacob. I mean, we could go on and on, and we'll spend 3 hours here. It won't be enough, So you had some very interesting insights there. So, Jacob, how about you?
Yeah, I came in when I was in college to the ACT world. I had previously been very interested in CBT and Gestalt, and I was sort of experimenting with Gestalt
Mm,
techniques and interventions in my practice a little bit, but I was still a student. And as I was graduating college, one of my friends was going to move away to a different state. So I thought, well, I'll get her a going away gift.
mm,
And I do this sometimes for friends of mine. And what a long time ago when I moved away, one of my friends gave me a book, and the book was "Stumbling on a Happiness" by Dan
mm,
Gilbert. And it
mm,
was this book about like how to build a happy life and like the things that contribute to happiness and stuff like
mm,
that, right?
mm,
So I went to the bookstore to look for that book. I wanted to get my friend this exact same book. So I'm looking in this section, happiness, self-help, and I did not find that book. Instead, I found The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. So my origin story is similar to a lot of clinicians. I got into it through Russ Harris. The Happiness Trap had just come out recently at that time, and so I
mm,
just randomly pulled it out and I started looking through the first couple of pages, and right away I could tell that this was different.
mm,
And it just so happened at the same time, that period of my life, I was severely depressed. I was extremely suicidal. I was just in the lowest point that I've ever been in my life. And I bought two copies of that book. I took it home and I started reading through it. And I just started applying the skills to myself in my own life. And I could notice a difference right away. It started to loosen things up for me, and I was able to interact with my own experience much differently. And I said, whoa. And I mean, as soon as I read that book, I started diving into all the other ACT books that were out at the time, and got involved with the ACT community. And then once I started practicing, more clinically, then I integrated it into my approach.
mm,
So it was something that was useful right off the bat for
mm,
me in my personal life.
yeah. All right. So, Jacob, just a follow up, when I was shifting from psychodynamic, not psychodynamic, first it was psychodynamic, and then I tried CBT, and then I tried existential psychotherapy. For me, that was closest to my heart before I discovered ACT, or contextual behavioral science. And what shifted inside me was that I don't hunt for what's wrong with this person sitting in front of me. What I look for now is the context that makes that behavior make sense, So that was the shift for me. In your case, what was the shift for you? Did it did it come in a similar way, that shift towards how you see that person you're 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 doing therapy with?
Yeah, I think so. It's I still to this day slip into that mode where I'm looking at how do I fix what's going on here. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have to pull myself back when I find myself there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think mostly the shift for me was like, changing from how do we change these thoughts? How do we replace these thoughts with different ones? And instead just thinking, yeah, so you have a mind that gives you thoughts, and yeah, no, and it some of these things can be used in certain ways, and some of them maybe are not so useful. So it actually, I think what did it for me too was the early part of my career. I
Mm-hmm.
actually was working with grief and bereavement
Mm-hmm.
counseling,
Mm-hmm.
and I was working with children and families and adults who had all experienced a death. And so, since I was doing grief work, there actually wasn't that much opportunity to be like, well, let me challenge this, or how do you replace this thought with this other thought. Grief work is very acceptance focused
Mm,
in the first place. So I was doing a lot of work just sitting with clients and
mm,
uh, allowing them to express their emotions and helping them express their emotions and thoughts and other things
mm,
without trying to change them or do anything with them other than notice that they're here and
mm,
can you hold on to them? So I was already working in a little bit of that fashion,
mm,
and then just kind of adding some of the act pieces on top of that,
mm,
especially once I moved on to a different setting and I wasn't working in the grief field much anymore. Then it became even more useful because otherwise it was just kind of helping people through the sort of
mm.
natural process of life. Right? Grief is always seen as a natural part of life that every human being experiences. So from that lens, I was never thinking like there's something wrong with this client, there's something wrong with this person. So I started my career that way, and luckily that lined up well with the ACT model.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Jacob. Now, just that was just one question. We already took 20 minutes of our so I need to move on to the next question. But thank you. Those are, I wish you had an eternity to do this, but I know you, especially Eugene, you're out on vacation and I'm here bothering you.
Technically,
Anyway,
I'm not on vacation. I'm just here as a
chaperone.
company chaperone. Yes, yes.
All right. Okay, so, I'm kind of a stubborn guy. I've heard people who taught me in psychodynamic school, taught me in ACT that, well, we're here, we have limitations, we're here to help people one at a time, you know. So I often hear that, and there's a Steve Jobs in me that I don't think so. I think I can apply this. I want to apply this to a bigger, let's say, community. It shouldn't be that difficult to scale it up from the individual to the society. And at that time, I didn't know about Walden too. So I guess I tried reading that book. It's so for me, it's I'm not a fiction reader. So uh, Skinner has a way of writing that makes puts me to sleep. So anyway, but I get his point, no? So uh, if CBS or contextual behavioral science works so well at the individual level, what changes when we try to scale it to societies? What do you think?
I think when you say society, when you say society, what comes to mind is always politics. A lot of things that shapes society is about policies, and we do have politics to come into play. And interestingly, this is what I observed, that a politician or advocates who goes around trying to ask for policy changes, if they are in line with some of the principles we practice in CBS,
Mm,
the policies that comes up, the ideas that comes up are more often beneficial. They are more often taking into account not all, but various perspective or various ideas. And this when I say like this, I don't just mean a whole country. We could be even be as small as a politics within a hospital itself or within a department itself. When we have these people in the in a position of power who are more CBS inclined, they might not be formally trained, but who are more CBS inclined, and they practice those ideas, the governance, the policies that comes up are very
mm,
often more moderate, more encompassing, allow some form of flexibility, and it actually benefits more people, and in turn brings out better things in the long run.
mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. So how, you say there's more flexibility? Is that what you said, Eugene?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So in flexibility in a way that you fit your policies to the context. Is that right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you aware of the what Stephen Hayes and Paul Atkins and pro-social? Uh, yeah, I read that book actually. It was very interesting, but you know I thought it kind of needed a little bit more of concrete examples of how it actually works. So it's very
Sure.
theoretical. It kind of gives you a little bit of a background of what they're trying to do. But I thought I wanted to do it in a way that we can use concrete examples, like like in our society, how can we make taxi drivers become more honest, more um, uh, let's say helpful to their passengers, because there are a lot of situations here. I don't know if any one of you has ever heard about our problems with the taxi drivers here in the Philippines. Sometimes they will, sort of in a way, it's hard to explain, but they kind of like want to try to rip you off, to charge you more than the fare that's actually being shown on the meter. So I came up with that example to kind of illustrate how we we can change, because in individual work or even in families or couples, we help the individual or the couple or the family adapt to the context, right? Now, as a leader, as you said, in politics or even in economics, you know, um, what we can do is we shift it around from making the people fit the context and creating a context that can fit how the people can naturally cooperate. Because we tend to want to cooperate with a context that promotes or that helps be, make it easier to be cooperative. You know?
Yes.
So
I
that's
think
basically what I tried to do in the Better People, Better Country, the book that I wrote. And thank you,
yes.
Jacob, for your very nice blurb. I appreciate it. So uh, what are your thoughts, Jacob?
Yeah. Well, maybe I can add something, a little bit different perspective.
Uh,
This is something I've thought about for a long time. If you think about just that word society as a whole, society is comprised of multiple sort of spheres, right? And
mm,
so we have this cultural sphere, then we have like a science and technology sphere, and then a government and a political sphere.
mhm,
The government and political sphere um, moves the slowest by
mhm,
design.
mhm,
You think about governments, sometimes governments last hundreds of years at a time
mhm,
in a very stable fashion.
mhm,
Governments, you want them to move slowly because when they move fast,
mhm,
things break. So
mhm,
we see that in the United States right now. We're at war for 2 weeks, and then we're not at war for 2 weeks, and we're at war for 2 weeks, and then we're not at war for 2 weeks, and we're
mhm,
attacking this country, and then we're not attacking this country. Back and forth. We got tariffs here, and then we don't have tariffs, and tariffs here. That
mhm,
kind of whiplash
mhm,
doesn't work well.
mhm,
Um, so governments are designed to move slowly. There's tons of bureaucracy and red tape and
mhm,
process that has to occur. But social and cultural dynamics move very fast.
mhm,
Somebody could post something on the internet today and it can become a global sensation, by the end of the day today.
mhm,
So social and cultural aspects move very rapidly.
mhm,
And then science and technology moves maybe in the middle of those two. So
mhm,
new scientific advancements are always being done, and they're integrated into the social sphere and the governmental sphere.
mhm,
And so if you think about like that process, who are the best RFT applied RFT people in the world?
mhm,
It's marketers and advertisers, right? But
mhm,
they're not consciously doing it. They're not technically doing RFT, but they're doing transformation of stimulus function, and they're doing
mhm,
augmenting how we see alcohol and cigarettes and
mhm,
gambling and fancy clothes that we can buy and the new
mhm,
phones that we need to have.
mhm,
That's all um, coming from somewhere, right? We're being influenced all the time in
Mm-hmm.
this social, cultural way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all in the service of capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Buying more and spending more and
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. So I think that those areas or those technologies that we developed in CBS can be easily applied for pro-social aims, but we just kind of have to figure out how to do it, right? So, we're kind of scientists and
Mm-hmm.
eggheads, right? So we think about it in terms of technologies and scientific endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more that I think that we could be doing on the kind of social and cultural level, in the
Mm-hmm.
same way that advertisers make me desire a certain product, right? They transform my how
Mm-hmm.
certain things function for me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We could apply that on the social and cultural level first, and then the
Mm-hmm.
government level is going to have to catch up later on, like it always does. But that's
Mm-hmm.
going to take many, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue that the main focus is how do we influence people on that kind of social, cultural level,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, building the feedback loop for cooperation and
Mm-hmm.
reinforcing that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the governments and science, technology will catch up as they do.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we have a lot of really smart people using some of these technologies,
Mm-hmm.
for this purpose, which is just to create wealth and things like that, which maybe is
Mm-hmm.
not the most important thing right now.
Mm. Okay. All right. Thank
But
you.
then, if I'm allowed to add on a bit
Sure,
on
sure,
everything,
Eugene, go ahead.
because it's interesting when you mention about Steve Hayes and the pro-social, and one of his core message at those teaching at the very beginning, it always highlight the idea that all of this work because evolution. It's allow civilizations to survive. It allows civilization to move on, or individual or as a whole group.
Mm.
And what I kind of noticed when what I was talking about and what Jacob was talking about, all this, it also has the same element, how all of this will convey in a society level is going to shape that society's direction. And a society that kind of encompasses this, that kind of embraces this well enough, it's going to survive, it's going to be developed, it's going to move on with technology or with not, culturally or not. But a
Mm.
society that struggles with all that, they, meaning that they don't kind of approach this from that CBS manner that we've been talking about,
Mm.
it's going to impact. And as everything about evolution that has always mentioned, when we put it in a very, very big picture, this kind of things build up in the longer run. And that's how society or civilizations fade away. That's how they end up being conquered. That's how they end up being, for lack of a better word, destroyed.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I kind of noticed that, and that kind of points out a lot. I mean, that's how important it is and how you actually influence it. It would in a way go back to the idea of survival, or go back of evolutionary survival and all that.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I I'm interested in also what Jacob said earlier, uh, is the transformation of stimulus function. Yeah. And that's when the word trust, yeah, um, when the government becomes something of a big, let's say, either it's a big regulatory body that's out to get you, or to wag a finger on you, or it turns into something that we're here to facilitate things for you. Here to help you. So that's where the RFT part, I think, comes in when it comes to scaling it up to the level of society. And I think, when you say evolution, Eugene, I think what you're saying is that part of our, us being social animals? Is that what you meant? Right?
Yeah, yeah. I
The,
mean, even the whole idea of when we talk about RFT, it's also about how our interactions with other language and all that. It's meant
uh,
for evolution. It is meant for us to
cooperate.
have experience as a human, to cooperate, to move
Yes.
towards the greater good. Good
Yes.
here is it's a neutral term in a way, and
Uh,
essentially the civilization or the society that is able to use this in a beneficial manner would move
Yes.
on, would be able
Yes.
to grow, would be able to do much more things. And that goes
Mm.
back to the idea of how CBS and RFT or this has a role in our day-to-day policies, in our
Yeah.
day-to-day practice, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I was struck by what you said that sometimes empires, deteriorate because of, this, uh, inability to, well, from my perspective, I think you're talking about that trusting people, trusting each other, seeing each other more like, uh, you know, uh, we're together in this. We're not opponents in this. I think I can see it happening real time in
Right now,
our era right
yeah,
now, especially in the United States. I think is that right, Jacob?
Yeah, yeah. And just to extend what Eugene is saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know that human beings are highly social, cooperative
Mm-hmm.
species. And at the same time, almost the entirety of our history as a species has been cooperating in very small social groups,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 10, 12 people in your social group, and that's it. It's only in the past couple thousand years that we've had these vast population expansion, big giant cities, millions and millions and billions of people.
Uh-huh.
And that's where we kind of get stuck. We're good at cooperating in small social groups, but when we extend that out to this large scale, it's much more difficult. And then if we think about how societies or countries or governments are evolving, right, at that level of group selection, because those things are so large and they're relatively slow moving, the experimentation takes longer, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
look at a petri dish, those bacteria in a petri dish, they evolve very quickly because they're multiplying so fast.
Mm-hmm.
Where here, there's 100-year spans, of things maybe changing bit by bit. And so we see the changes at a slower scale. And of course, as y'all are saying too, right now, we're in a period of maybe some kind of pivot point or some kind of change in global society or how the world is working. And we see it in many different countries happening all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because, like Eugene was saying, you know, civilizations fall, they rise, but sometimes when they fall, they're not just killed by some outside force, they're killed from within, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people, the individual people inside these societies say, this is
Yeah.
not working anymore, right? And we need to change it, and we're going to change it by any means necessary if we have to. And so a lot of civilizations have been, they've died or gone away, but only because the people within them, grow into a different form. And so I think that's what we're seeing as well as is individual human beings are kind of aligning themselves in a way that makes these large scale impacts that, are going to be hard to discern, except for 20, 50 years, 150 years in the future. We'll see those patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interestingly, what Jacob was just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the bigger picture, the world now,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the country nowadays, at this day and age, because we happen to be in this age now, the country that reacts without taking into consideration the context, the ones that are reactive, very often gets into trouble very quickly. I'm not going to name the countries, but we can just turn on the news and we kind of know. The
Mhm.
countries that are taking into consideration the context, the countries that are not bounded exactly by a strict rule of who's my friend, who's my enemies, we
Mm-hmm.
somehow are able to observe that they are going towards a more useful way. And we can see this, if I would just narrow this within Southeast Asia, the natural resource crisis, we could literally just compare and see which country is reacting very quickly as a knee-jerk reaction and which one is not. And the consequences is huge. I think this kind of also reflects some of our own individual approach to CBS, isn't it? Looking at the context, the one that reacts very quickly often, not all the time, but very often ends up with consequences that we don't
Mm-hmm.
really want. Whereas the ones that kind of take into context and start looking at different options and pause a bit, make decisions. We're seeing that in the global scale now, all I'm saying, and that is observable now. We just need to turn on the TV and just pay attention to it.
Yeah. I think they call that in, I don't know if I'm getting it, Eugene. I think in ABA they call it delayed discounting. It's like going for the smaller sooner rather than the larger later, as Stephen Hayes would uh, say in one of his workshops, ACT immersion, right? Okay, so we kind of react, as Skinner said, we kind of react more on the immediate consequences, right? Rather than the long-term consequences. Okay. Yeah, wow. I don't know if we have enough time to answer all these questions I have, but I'll do my best to finish all of them. So, uh, let me start with something I try to apply to the bigger society, or communities, that where we just talked about. It's like imagining a child and you wag your finger and say, clean your room, right? So at first, cleaning your room is actually a neutral task. There's nothing negative or positive about it. It's just something, you know, we do. Now, but once the pressure enters, the tone, the repetition, the task itself becomes aversive. Uh, okay, so um, the child isn't resisting the cleaning itself, they're resisting the context around the task of cleaning, right? So I think societies work the same way. The governments, I can see it in our country, a government says pay your taxes, follow rules, be responsible citizens. These are not bad instructions, but when systems feel unfair and or inconsistent, those instructions stop functioning as guidance. They start functioning as pressure, right? So from CBS perspective, the issue isn't a lack of values. It's that the function of cooperation has changed. It becomes something aversive. No? So the question becomes, how do we design systems where cooperation feels natural, not coerced? So I want to hear your thoughts about that. And can you give examples in your countries where you see small communities uh, inspire their people to cooperate, by changing the context? Maybe let's start with Jacob this time.
Sure. Yeah. I think something that comes to mind for me first is this idea that the just that phrasing, the government, is in itself like a metaphor, right? We can view the government as like a single entity that
Mm-hmm.
exists. That's
Mm-hmm.
one thing. And if it's one thing, then it's easy for me to either love it or hate it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we think of the government as a process or like hundreds of or thousands of interconnected branches
Mm-hmm.
or activities happening all at once, there are parts of these branches that I don't like at all. And then there might be really other parts that I really, really enjoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a country as large as the United States, there's thousands of those branches. I mean, every state government is in local and city, and then the federal government. I often will look at the government, that one thing, and I really don't like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But then I take my daughter to the library, the local library here that is funded, with tax dollars, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the best library I've ever been to. It's just a wonderful experience,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much social services and things that happen
Mm-hmm.
through the library that are accessible for free, and I really love that part of the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of this difficulty we experience is when the government is all one thing, then it's easy for that one thing to dominate or be on top of you. It's like the top of the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
When in theory, the way that we have defined government in the United States is it's of the people and by the people, for the people. So
Mm-hmm.
technically, all of us are part of the government, but
Mm-hmm.
we often don't feel like we are. Um, so on the local level, right, there's always things happening in terms of mutual aid and connection and really wonderful things that are occurring. We often don't see that process as the government also. We only think of the government as the president and the Supreme Court and the Congress and all the things that they're doing to us, right? It feels like they're doing it to us rather than us participating in something. But when we go to the library, when we go to a local, when we drive down these local roads and the streets, and um, we're participating in our government action all the time, and we're
Mm.
enjoying the benefits of it. So I think a simple kind of reframe for educational purposes might be like, why don't we stop thinking about the government as one entity and start thinking of it as multiple activities or a process that's ongoing that gives us a sense of agency, like, oh, I can change this process, or I can be a part of this process, instead of I need to fight the government, or things like that.
Mhm. So I think what you're saying, Jacob, is that you see the tangible, let's say, results of where your taxes go or something like that. Is that what you're saying? That
Yeah.
you tend to feel like, okay, I'm part of the system. My taxes go to places where I can actually benefit. Right? Is that right?
Well, we all hope that that's the case, but a lot of us don't
Uh,
feel that way. A lot of us feel like my taxes are
uh,
just wasted, right?
uh,
Or spent irresponsibly.
uh,
But there are times in which we can directly benefit from those, and we can
mm,
sing those praises too, right? So
yeah.
there's ways to get people involved in this process of government,
Yes. Yes.
without it being like a binary distinction. You're either a
Mm,
part of the government or you're not.
mm, yeah. Because when I went to the US and I experienced the libraries there, I can really see how, if that were happening in my country, I'd be very happy about how our taxes are being spent, because you have a very sophisticated library system there, very convenient. Yeah, you can get any book around the world you want, they'll have it for you. Yeah, okay. Okay, so Eugene, your turn.
Uh, okay, as full context, these questions were shared to me earlier, so I don't actually even prepared about this. I am going to just say what comes to mind.
Sure, sure.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I think if you ever heard of the metaphor, the frog that both sits in the water, and then when you turn on the heat, it doesn't realize that it's being boiled to death eventually.
Okay.
That,
Yeah.
that one metaphor. I think societies. I'm not going to go down a dark negative manner, but I do think that society changes is almost always very similar to that. But it just sometimes just need a little poke and the frog would quickly jump out of the water. Sometimes we just need a little spark. We've seen this kind of events across different countries that, just someone uprising, what you call it, a protest and all this, and then suddenly things go change.
Mm.
Um, Coming back to your question, the reason why I'm saying this is because the 1984 Orwellian book, the 1984, the one that George Orwell wrote about, it mentions something called a think speak. The language used at that point prevents rebellion, prevents protest, prevents free thinking. I feel that a lot of the emotions or reactions we have towards governance or towards policies, it's not that because it is unjust. It's just that because it was introduced in such a way, and very often it's not a sudden decision. It's a build-up of decisions that kind of shapes our perspective towards the things that we're experiencing. And then eventually one day we realize, why are we in this position that makes us so uncomfortable or distressful? And I feel that that boils down to the idea of think speak, the idea of language use. The reason why I mentioned this because in Malaysia, I remember how I grew up when I was younger, and I remember the society now. If we look at our media, if we look at our common, we just need to open things like traits, or we don't use X, we use traits more often here, and you start seeing the racial conversations, the racial discriminations, and all this. Words are being used as weapons to drive the racial agenda in our country. It's not in real life. In real life, I rarely see racism or racial discrimination. But the undercurrent of that is very visible through the language. And from that language that developed over many, many years, it shapes a lot of perspective of people around. And it also builds up the number of incidents that's related to racial discrepancy, racial violence, and so on and so forth. That's why I feel that at the end of the day, if we want to change policies to make it more comfortable, we do need to go back to this idea, the language being used. Similar to what Jacob mentioned, the marketing, the people who are doing the marketing, the ones who are doing the advertising, people who are doing all those work related to policy changes, related to policy decisions, will need to come up with language that kind of drive towards that. Sometimes to go towards a useful one, it could be a very, again, slowly turn down the fire so that the water comes back to a comfortable temperature, or have someone spark enough conversations to have words that comes in. We've seen this in Malaysia before. All it took was a very huge protest with words being used, and we had an entire government shift. For over 40 over years, 50 over years, we suddenly have an entirely different politics, and our politics has been a bit unstable since then. To pretty much two directions that we could in. Changing the words gradually towards a more useful ones, but this one would require people in power to want to make those kind of decisions, or have a very sudden, strong, powerful language or symbols that comes in, and that will kind of shape it towards. I think those are probably the two, both ends, on the spectrum to kind of change. If you ever want to see any of our policies, if you ever want to see any of our broader society decisions change in any meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me ask you, Eugene, because I'm not as familiar with Malaysia, so I want to know if you see patterns in Malaysia wherein good policies lose their effectiveness depending on how they're experienced by the citizens, right?
Mm.
Or more broadly, what conditions of or systems uh, what system features make cooperation feel more workable in Malaysia. We have a place here in Mindanao. It's
Yeah.
like paradise. It's one of the most popular tourist areas here. It's a very small island down south next to the Pacific Ocean. And you'll be surprised at how that place is being developed. There are no fast food chains. They made the decision not to make it like like any other city here in the Philippines. So they make all the developments more indigenous, like the people who are there, they create their small cafes or restaurants. And there are no they're very the island's very well kept. There's no garbage problem. I'm not sure. This is just what I'm hearing from the news, and it's very popular even for Western tourists. So they don't use straws. They're very careful about the waste. And this is because it's all tied down to their economic well-being, partly also because they see tourism as a means to a better life, wherein that could have just been a very secluded island where nobody goes. So I don't know, in Malaysia, do you see examples where systems or policies that were good lose their effectiveness depending on how it is experienced by the people, you know, and
The fact,
when, uh-huh,
yeah, the fact that I'm going to say this next sentence kind of also shapes my own fear of what I'm actually going to explain. So
mhm.
I'm not going to be able to give exact examples because this is going to go into open public domain, and I don't want to get uh, I don't want to get assaulted, or I don't want to get negative
Yes.
feedback towards me. And this
Yes.
is the exact same thing I mentioned about. Um, I have seen policies. We do have policies nationwide or even
Mm,
within cities itself that on paper, that on discussions were useful.
mhm,
But remember what I talk about, the thought speak, the think speak, that there is an underlying language that runs in the background that kind of shapes how people think about things. I have seen the very same policies that I talk about just now didn't work, because once those policies were launched, and then it creeps in the society kind of back talks to say that this is incompatible with certain religions, this is incompatible with certain races, this is incompatible, so on and so forth. and that seeps into the community who's supposed to experience those policies, and that policies end up either being ineffective or get scraped off because of those thoughts. But on paper, on concepts, on theory, those policies were good. They should have continued. They should have brought in benefits. The background undercurrent itself pushes it away, stops it. Yeah, and like I said, the mere thought of this kind of background things, it also influences even my conversation now. I have ideas or examples in my head, but I can't say this because I know this is going to be recorded, and I know that Malaysia is very famous for one thing. If anything in the world, we're very famous for our internet armies. Say the wrong thing, say something that's unpleasant. Yeah, there goes my internet footprint. That fear is real, and it's highly shaped by this thought speak or think speaks that kind of pushes everything. And I would say, if we go back to this idea of pro-social, a lot of Malaysians have our actual real life day-to-day conversations, our lifestyle, but we potentially, some of them would have entirely different beliefs or personalities when they are online, when they are dealing with media. And of course, all of those would in turn shapes a lot of how things gets done. We have among our friends, among our peers, when we have discussions like this, we notice, I just within my colleagues itself, I have colleagues who sit down with me, nice meals, nice discussions, we talk very cordially, supportive, nice people. Turn on their social media profile, it's like an entirely different person already. Their ideologies and beliefs, I'm coming from a neutral approach, are entirely different on what's being portrayed in real life. But that same ideology, when you collectively combine it as a whole, it's actually a very powerful tool. And yeah, it will impact policies, it will impact decisions that are meant to bring better good, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me turn to another subject. We might run out of time. We only have half an hour to go. I don't know if I told you that I'm gonna get 90 minutes of your time. Is that okay? Do
Whichever.
you, okay.
I might run out of internet data since I'm roaming, but we work with what we can.
Oh my, I'm so
No, no, don't worry,
sorry.
don't worry. I could always extend it
Okay.
later. It's just
Uh,
if I get cut off, I'll come back in after I get additional data. If
all
I
right.
get cut.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Uh, I want to turn to Jacob. This question, I, I've seen Robert Putnam on YouTube, and he wrote the book called Bowling Alone, and I got that from the Gottmans. John Gottman, he mentioned that he societies that develop well are usually based on this understanding of trust. And I can see, I don't know, do you see a decline in trust in the US? And what do you think contributed to that over time? And how might RFT help us understand how something like government can shift in its function from something supportive to something aversive? Because I hear a lot of very strong language now from America, from what I hear online, or even on the mainstream media. Huh?
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that book, but definitely I think there's been a loss of trust by other countries, towards the United States,
Mm,
especially over the recent decade or so.
mm,
Within the country itself, it always just depends on who's in power at the moment, right?
mhm,
Um, we're such a polarized country that essentially half the demographics, are distrustful of the government at any one time.
mhm,
But even those numbers are skewed because those are just the numbers we have. The polling data captures, maybe what 40% of the population is thinking or feeling. It doesn't cover the entirety of the population. Um, but I guess what I would say is I think human beings are inherently trusting. We want to trust what's around us and the people around us. And
mhm,
and distrusting itself is aversive, right? If I'm in a room with people that I don't know and I'm not sure if I can trust them, that's an aversive context for me. And so the thing that we do is we try to build trust with people that are around us. Um, so in that sense, trust can be built very quickly. If we are able to interact in a context that allows it. But I just to bridge this with this idea of cooperation too, I think it's not a case of like there's just a lack of cooperation happening, and if we did more cooperation, things would be better. It's also the type of cooperation and who's involved in the cooperation that matters a lot. Because if I'm a billionaire or a politician in the country, there's actually a ton of cooperation happening. But I'm making deals with my friends and my buddies who have government contracts, and I'm funneling money over here to there and back and forth, and they're funneling money to me. So we're all cooperating up here on this level. But the levels underneath that, right, the different social classes, they're not able to cooperate at the level above, their own.
Mhm.
And then people in positions of power sometimes make it more difficult for people at the lower end of the spectrum to cooperate amongst themselves,
Mhm.
right? Because the thinking is if all of the poorest people, working class people were to cooperate, there's way more of them than there are of us here at the top of the pyramid,
Mhm.
right? So that puts us in danger. Um, I think trust has been broken. I mean, I see it a lot online with people making comments. I'll never trust, this certain kind of person ever again. I'll never trust people from this state again, right? We lump, people, there's millions of people in every state. We lump them all together as if they're one thing. But like Eugene was saying, day to day on the actual ground, not online, but on the actual ground, just people interacting, you don't really see it that much in terms of distrust. People are inherently trusting. You see people working together all the time,
Mhm.
and they don't even know what their politics are.
Mhm.
If I'm at a store or at a place and I'm talking to somebody, I can't tell who they voted for most of the time,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna interact with them just as I would any other person. It doesn't color my judgment.
Mhm.
But online, when we're arguing back and forth about things, then it's a different story. So trust is rapidly evolving. It can go down very quickly, but it can come back very quickly. And I think we're going to see that happen. Again, if we have a shift in our government here, we're going to see increase in trust potentially. It just depends. Um, but then another portion of the population would be distrustful of that back and forth. So it's constantly in flux, but it's also driven, like Eugene was saying, it's driven by the language that we use and the types of um, words that we choose to demonize or dehumanize other groups of people.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know how, in terms of fixing it, who knows? But I think I trust that human beings lean towards the side of wanting to trust each other, and therefore it's just allowing what is a natural process to occur,
Mhm.
and removing some of those artificial obstacles to trust. I think that's maybe a way that we could go about it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's interesting because you noticed something I didn't notice. Yeah, maybe we don't talk about in circles where we meet and have dinner or lunch with each other, have meals together. But when we're online, that we take on a different personality, right? And that's, I think, what you're trying to say. Yeah, that brings me to thinking a lot right now about how that happens in terms of transformation of stimulus functions. But I don't know if we have time to go deeper into that. Maybe later, if you want to expound more on that, especially Eugene, you brought it up, so that's very interesting. But right now, I want to discuss something that's kind of relevant to what we're experiencing now. We see cases where language can transform even harmful actions into something experienced as moral or justified. I'm justified to do this. Eh? from an RFT perspective, that transformation of stimulus function. I remember talking to Hank Robb. He says TOSF. That's the key. Transformation of stimulus function. The behavior doesn't change, but its psychological impact does. So even the very harsh words that we use tends to have a different impact on us. It doesn't become the behavior that we don't want to do. It becomes something justified, maybe something like that. So I think the same process applies to institutions. When government becomes linked with corruption or coercion, and then people start interacting with it, feeling an aversion towards the government. uh. Another example might be how language can frame harm towards certain groups, like you said, Jacob, as justified. For instance, when people are labeled as bad or dangerous, violent actions against them can start to feel acceptable or necessary. We see a lot of that in now in the news, no? So from an RFT perspective, that transformation of stimulus function, the behavior doesn't change, but its meaning and emotional impact do. So did you observe that in somehow in your part of the globe? And I think for Jacob, that's very familiar now. How about you, Eugene?
I think my wife loves to watch CNN and other international news. We kind of just need to look into the news. We turn on the news, we do see it here every day.
Uh,
Uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, we do. I think it's something that I am consciously aware. Every time we look at our media, where the statements come in,
mhm,
uh, it is there. Um, it could it and it ranges across different domains in life. Say I'm a psychiatrist, so if I just look at mental health itself, the way reporting is being done for mental health within the Malaysian context,
mhm,
uh, very very different. But in fact, not too long ago, we did a comparison of the same news of the same incident in Australia.
mhm,
You take the Australian media and you look at the Malaysian media of the same news, same events, they were two entirely different ones. One says this person behaved abnormally. Malaysia's one is this person is believed to be mentally unwell and behaves so. The language use itself. And I think that's just mental health. We do see it across many different. And to me, observing it is not just one thing. The harm that comes from it, being aware of it it's also very fatigue, also very tiring. But I think this applies to everyone also, whether they fully consciously or unconsciously be aware. How often do we start asking ourselves now, can we trust medias that we read? How often do we trust the newspaper we read? Do we start looking at different sources? All of that is because of either unconscious or conscious awareness that how language is beginning to shape different perspective of everyday day-to-day experience. There are some people who could ignore this entirely and only rely on one sources of information.
mhm,
Good them, less distress. But the whole entire experience is all shaped by that one source again. But on the other hand, if you're aware and you start looking at different sources and you start comparing them, it is very tiring. It is very hard to to build trust to see which one comes in. And ultimately, I think most of the time when that happens, the mind kind of shuts down and we kind of just pick the one perspective that we feel most strongly about. It's not whether it's true or not, it's just which context is the one that I'm willing to consider or believe in anymore. Um, I do think that that's how the society is shaped. This is not new. This has been there from the beginning of civilizations. I think it's just that it's becoming more and more prominent because the way of the access to this kind of information uh, it's more easy. It's the world has become smaller. We have the internet and all that, and even worse now we have AI and worse in the neutral sense. And yeah, and that language part is going to become more and more prominent. And I do really think that the whole concept of think speak I talk about from the book that was written many years ago, it's becoming more and more true. Then that we do have to be aware now that language use is going to shape our perspective, and we really need to start making certain decisions and all this to make sure that we don't end up being guided towards something that's harmful or hurtful to us then.
Mhm. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, I think we're running short of time. I still have one more question to ask you guys. So this one is kind of let's say I'm allowing you to dream if you were in a position of influence, all right, whether in government, education, or institutions. Huh? What's one practical change you would make to shape environments so that cooperation becomes more workable for people? So let's just uh, let ourselves loose for a while and see how where our imagination can bring us. Uh, I've cited an example where um, if I was running the transportation department in our country, and we have this problem about taxi drivers being cheating their clients, their riders, for excess fare. Uh, I would come up with sort of a rating system so that their income is dependent on how they service their clients. Not just one size fits all, that all of you would charge the same fare, and no matter how bad your taxi looks like, you still get the same fare as the one that has a brand new taxi, or someone who's doing his work really well. And I don't know. We have Grab here. I think it's the in the US it's called Uber, right? And it's run, I think, by a Singaporean or Malaysian company. I'm not sure, or Indonesian. I'm not sure. And they really run a good system wherein the drivers are accountable. The drivers get rated by their customers about how they did, and it's a very successful model here in the Philippines. And of course, there are always some bad eggs now and then, but generally, it's been doing very well here. So that's my example of how, if I were running the transportation department here, I would introduce that kind of context for making it easier for taxi drivers to cooperate. How about you guys? You have an example?
I can go. No, I think similar to what I was saying before. For this question, I'm thinking about if I had influence over education, maybe because I think the government might be a little bit too, like I was saying, government is not one thing; it's a big interconnected process. But let's say I was an educator at a school, like for children. Um, like part of what I would try to do is rethink this idea that there are such things as subjects. We teach math and science and English, or reading and writing, and political science and art and music. We teach those as if they're all separate things.
Mm,
Um, and we go to different rooms to learn them with different teachers, right? And so I think what we want to do is realize that all of these things are interconnected. They all influence each other. Um, and we can be curious about all these things and apply the same kind of language to all of them. In other words, we can use math and music, we can use math and art, and so forth. And we can think about political stuff in all of these different classes or subjects. And so I think we need to be maybe current event or focused. In other words, a lot of the examples we use when we teach kids, they're just abstract, stuff that doesn't exist, or things that happened a long time ago. We can always look at the present day and all the different things that are going on and build lessons from the present day
mm,
on the fly. Of course, the reason we don't do that in real life is because it's a disadvantage for the teachers that teachers would have to come up
mm,
with those lesson plans. So it's much easier just to have a one lesson plan that I used for 10 years, and it's exactly the same every year. But we would have a much more dynamic educational system, and children, I think, would enjoy it more and become more well-rounded people
mm,
as they enter adulthood,
mm,
if they're able to be exposed to all of these elements in
mm,
context, essentially, instead of being devoid of context, learning them dry.
Mm,
one at a time. So that's kind of a move that I might make in the education sphere.
thank you, Jacob. All right, Eugene, you have any example you can think of? If not, it's okay. I know
I can.
you had very little time to prepare for this.
No worries.
Sorry.
I
All
think I
right.
can, but again, I think as you mentioned, I'm in Prague now, and I just visited the alchemy, one of the alchemy museums. So my example is going to be based on that. Similar, Jacob, I think education. But I'm thinking more higher order education, the academicians and all this. I think, I think our current approach with academics has somehow deviated to a degree. A lot of things are allowed to be manifested. A lot of things are allowed to be talked about and said about. What I'm going to say here is I'm not trying to stifle freedom of exploring things, but I feel if I'm allowed to make changes, I would want to go back to similar how the great, I can't think of the words, but the time when the scientific methods were created, a lot of times it's not about what you say is true. It's about how you're going to prove what you say is true. I think in our day and our current day, when we talk about academicians and all this, uh, that art to a certain degree is lost. It now boils down to who published the most, who is so-called experts in a particular field. And somewhere along the line, when left unchecked, we have people making very bombastic or drastic statements that while might be laughable, it ends up becoming true for some part of people, a certain part of people. And a lot of times when these statements were made, they're not checked. They're not checked. And they in turn brings up ideas or brings up language that is related to that as truth. I feel that if I were able to make policy changes, I want to bring back that kind of uh, I'm using this word rather loosely, but the kind of rigidness when it comes to academician. It is always about you proving your doctrine. You must be able to have a certain method to prove it, and you can have healthy discussions about it. And it is supposed to evolve based on your findings and go on to that. It's not about who published the most papers, who is the so-called experts about it. It's more of can you prove your argument? Can you prove your statements in a very scientific manner? And I think from there itself, it will also even because everyone agrees with that, everyone embraces this kind of approach, it would also shape the language that gets born out of that. And that kind of language in turn shapes the knowledge shapes how society or how the world reacts to things. Yeah, if I'm allowed to dream, I think that's one, even though I myself find the academic requirements are getting more tougher and tougher by the day. But yeah, if you talk about dreaming, I think those are changes I think that will be useful.
Yeah. You know, sorry to segue this, but I did notice going with what you said, Eugene, and also you, Jacob, about education. I've been getting in touch with some of my professors from college and also from graduate school, and I've been mentioning ACT and RFT to them, which they are completely unaware of. Which surprised me because I thought we were mostly part of the mainstream as well, you know. I mean, at least we're psychology, you know. So I was surprised that some of them hardly ever heard about ACT, or they see it as just one of those tools, you know, another uh, one, you know, sometimes it will be compared to NLP or DBT, you know. So, uh, and I kind of did my own research. Why is that? Because the when I my first introduction to ACT was the book Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. So I didn't have the philosophical language. I was trained the same way. I was told that this tool is for this, CBT is better for phobias, and trauma is psychodynamics better for trauma, you know, traumatic experiences. So that was how I was trained. And when I uh, listened to that, the audiobook of Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life, I felt that shift, the paradigm shift. I didn't know I was dealing with a perspective or a lens of how I see the world, you know, that world hypothesis. You know? So, you know, and I think Jacob and I, we did a bit of a workshop, right? About coherence. And that's what I learned, people want to hear something coherent, but they don't really want to see the functional part of it. Is actually actually explains the behavior, not just naming the behavior or identifying what disorder you have, what DSM category you belong to. So I don't know if you have the same experience. But I'm surprised that ACT and RFT, yeah, some people, there are people out there who know it, but not as philosophically uh, grounded, I think. I don't know. Maybe in Malaysia, or maybe I know that we're still not the mainstream, right? ACT and RFT, right? We're still growing very fast, but there's I'm not sure. I don't have the statistics, but from your
As
experience,
far as I'm aware, ACT is active in Philippines and Malaysia. Uh,
okay.
Not any other countries in Southeast Asia, not even Singapore actually. Very
Uh-huh.
small group of practitioners.
Uh-huh.
But to hike on what you just mentioned, the way I see it, it's not whether people know about ACT or even CBS. I would prefer to see from the perspective of, if you always think about someone who struggles with if they go through a midlife crisis and they want to find meaning of life,
Mm,
uh, the ones that are successful in a way, are the ones who have come across a certain philosophy that they can finally explain or get meaning to their life. They could do it through ACT. They could do it through the religion.
mhm,
In clinical setting, they do it through maybe psychotherapy. I think if I were to just narrow it back down to ACT and psychotherapy
mm,
as a box, so I think a lot of therapies, the good ones, the so-called evidence-based ones, the decent ones, the one that actually do bring a lot of tangible changes. Very often, the underlying idea underneath it, it's always about meaning. It's always about giving meaning or putting labels to the context. Look at psychodynamic, look at CBT, look at even our ACT and RFT. It's always about giving meaning to life experiences.
mm,
And I think that's more core. It's not about whether people know about ACT. It's more, can people get in touch with any form of philosophical, therapeutic, or spiritual approaches
mm,
that can allow them to develop that meaning. Uh, it's okay if they're not going through it through ACT and all these things. It's okay if they don't know about ACT. If they can tell you that I have a certain religion, Catholicism, Buddhism,
mm,
or even Islam, or they go through some other therapy and they are able to achieve that, I think that matters more. That's more important.
mm,
But of course, selfishly, I would of course also prefer that CBS gets more developed within the Southeast Asia region. But I've worked at it for 5 years already.
mm.
I At this stage, I'll take whatever that comes. If we get more and more people who knows about it, that's a good progress. If it's not, then we work with what we have.
Yeah. So you try to find common ground, right? Like you may not call it ACT or whatever, but as long as it's kind of like workability, that's our truth criterion. Does it work
Yeah,
in your life? That's what you're trying to, I think, say, Eugene. I don't know if I got you right.
yeah, exactly. That's right.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay. Jacob, any last word before we end this panel discussion?
Yeah, just to jump off like what y'all are saying, the
Mm-hmm.
language matters a lot, right? And in contextual behavioral science, a lot of times the language we use is very inaccessible to the average person. We have all these terms: transformation of stimulus function, arbitrarily applicable, relational responding, stuff like that. These are not easy terms to use or wrap your head around. And we speak that language, as professionals and behaviorists like that. So it's useful in our context, but that language is not as useful in other contexts. Even the way that we talk about like something as simple as like you'll see it in the books,
Mm,
verbally able organisms. What organisms on Earth are verbally able?
mm,
There's only one. It's human beings. So why do we even need to say verbally able organisms? Why don't we just call them people, right? And
Mm,
so if we change the language, um, it will become adopted more widely.
mm,
And as Eugene has pointed out, the things that are unique in ACT often are those terms, the terminology,
mm,
um, but the concepts are not unique to ACT. I mean, they exist out in the world, right? ACT and RFT and CBS simply describe behavior that is already occurring, right? We
mm,
describe behavior that we're observing and witnessing. We're not creating these things, from scratch. We're
mm,
just developing constructs that help us describe what we
mm,
see. So we can get to the same place from many different directions. And it doesn't
mm,
have to look like it looks in the CBS world, the terminology that we use.
mm,
Um, so I think there's a ton that can be done within CBS to help communicate what we do to
mm,
larger audiences in a more accessible way. And
mm,
that's going to take some time. It's because of the founders of ACT and CBS and the way that they think and the language that they use. We're still steeped in that, but that's
mm.
going to change over time.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a lovely conversation, very animated, and thank you so much for, especially Eugene. I
Anytime,
know.
anytime.
Anyway, taking time off of walking around Prague must be beautiful out there in the spring, especially. And Jacob, of course, you've always been someone I can count on every time. And thank you for joining me here. And I've always enjoyed you remind me of so much about uh, what we're here for a lot of times. And
Thank you for the invitation.
yes, and yeah, thank you for your time and your resources for joining us. I don't know how much roaming is in your part of the world right now. In the Philippines, when you go roaming, that's very expensive. Anyway, so
I have not used up my quota yet, so far it's still free.
okay, all right. So you
All right.
take care and you we'll end this session now. All right. So you
All
take
right.
care. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.